How to run the perfect mini cut. So by perfect, I'm talking about a mini cut here that is actually going to increase your rate of physique progression in the long term, rather than being one of the things that contributes to you stalling despite putting a lot of work in with your physique. And this is something that has become unbelievably common in recent years. So a lot of people have started to use mini cuts because they sound scientific. It sounds like you know what you're talking about. If you say I'm mini cutting for X and Y, but a lot of people just use it as an excuse to constantly yo-yo diet. So they will deploy a mini cut prior to every holiday that they go on. They might go on multiple holidays per year. Every time they want to look lean, they'll chuck in a mini cut, and then immediately after that mini cut, they'll balloon straight back up in body weight. Then they feel a little bit soft. They'll use that as an excuse to mini cut again, and people can continue like that for years, and they never sort of gain any muscle. Their physique never changes. They just oscillate in this mid region of never getting really lean, never really packing on much muscle. And that is truthfully a lot of people. You walk through any gym, most people are stuck in that camp. So what we're going to talk about today is how you set up a mini cut in the most scientific way possible to maximize your long-term physique progression. So there are really two types of mini cut. There is the mini cut that you use just to pull off some body fat because you want to look good for a certain event, but you don't necessarily need, a whole diet. And then you've got a mini cut that you use to potentiate future physique progression. And that is the one that fits under the banner of like the perfect mini cut. That's the one that's actually going to progress your physique in the long term. The first one is fine to do occasionally, and you can sort of combine them. So by using some of the components of, mini cut B, as it were, the physique progression one or potentiation mini cut, you can adjust some of those variables to make the mini cut you do as a last ditch effort to look better on holiday a little bit more productive for your long-term physique goals. But really, if we're talking about running the perfect mini cut, we're talking about one that allows you to repotentiate future muscle growth. So this is one that is run during a longer hypertrophy phase. If you are running, a year in a surplus, looking to add as much muscle as you possibly can to your frame, a mini cut will be deployed to allow you to continue gaining muscle at an improved rate. So what we need to consider here is, well, what are the things that are actually going to stop you gaining muscle, all right, when we are in those longer hypertrophy phases? Because these are the things that we need to address if we're going to deploy mini cuts in the most efficient way possible for your long-term physique progression. Number one, and potentially most important, is going to be appetite resetting, okay? So anyone that's run a really long gaining phase will tell you that, the hardest thing about continuing to gain weight at a certain point is literally just fitting the calories in. I remember a good few years ago, I ran my first really long bulk, and I got up to about 6,000 calories. Well, it wasn't about, it was 6,147 or something like that. I got up to that calorie intake for multiple months at a time, and I remember literally just waking up feeling sick, looking at my porridge and mass gain a shake. Yeah, those are the days. So one of the most powerful things that a mini cut can do is obviously just resetting your appetite, okay? So it's a short period of time where we are looking to take your hunger from very low levels that is interfering with your ability to actually sort of keep gaining body weight and providing that environment for growth. So we want to run a short mini cut, okay? Now, one of the primary differences between a mini cut and an actual cut is just going to be duration. So we're looking for like 4 to 6 weeks for a mini cut, whereas obviously an actual cut is going to be any time longer than this, with the goal of repotentiating, future muscle growth, rather than the goal of creating a really lean physique and maximizing and showing off what you've built previously. So two different goals. Off the back of that shorter duration, we're going to have, much more assertive rate of gain. So when we're in a normal fat loss phase, we're typically looking for like 0.5 to 1% of body weight loss per week. In a mini cut, because it's much shorter and we're aiming to get you hungry, okay? So you can see we don't want to be hungry when we're setting someone up for a cut. We want to get someone as hungry as possible, as quickly as possible on a mini cut. So we aim for a faster rate of gain, bigger deficit. So we're aiming for about 0.75 to 1.25% of body weight loss per week. So these are the things, these are the levers that we can pull in order to increase someone's appetite a little bit quicker. Okay, so that's the first reason we would mini cut, is if someone's appetite is getting too low for them to continue gaining. So a really good example I can give you here is my client Corey, who has been running a very long gaining phase, got to the point where he was consistently 1 out of 10 on appetite, dreading the look of food, and we were starting to stall out as a result. So we ran a mini cut phase, and now, you know, months later, we pulled off 5 kilos in a few weeks. Months later, we are now back up to the body weight. A couple of months later, back up, 4 months later, we are back up to the body weight that he had previously stalled at with 1 out of 10 hunger, and he's now at 4 out of 10 hunger, back to that same body weight. So you can see that mini cut has bought him runway for future muscle growth progression. Okay, so number 1 is appetite. Number 2 would be body fat. Okay, if someone is getting to the point where it's either unhealthy, just unhappy with the way that you're looking, then you could consider running a mini cut just to make sure that they can basically grow in a body fat percentage range that they are happy with. Now, many people take this too far, and they'll use it as an excuse just to mini cut every time they're starting to see their abs fade. If you do this, it's a very quick way of, you know, just stalling your progress. And I would suggest running no more than 2 mini cuts per year max. If you're doing it more frequently than that, then your ratio of time spent in a surplus versus in a deficit starts to get a little bit questionable. If you're looking to maximize muscle growth, then obviously we want a favorable ratio of time spent accumulating muscle mass versus time spent dieting. Remember, mini cut is not the big diet. It's just little diets along the way to allow you to continue making progress. So the first 2 things, the first 2 reasons that we would mini cut are going to be appetite and body composition specific. But the most important and probably the most interesting area for this video that you would sort of mini cut for is to improve sensitivity to training stimulus. Okay, now this comes in loads of different forms, all right? Many people think of just sensitivity to training stimulus as how well you grow off one individual set. So really it's volume. And that is probably one of the biggest elements to it, but there are lots of sort of quite cool things to address here. So when it comes to training volume, what we have to understand here is that the amount of volume required to build muscle is going to sort of creep up over time, okay? So you need more in order to force your body to keep adapting, okay? But the amount of muscle required to maintain muscle is very, very low, okay? Some literature, in fact, the literature that we have at the moment, which I'm a little bit doubtful about the numbers being quite this low, but the literature we have at the moment suggests that 1/9 of the training stimulus in terms of like volume load or volume and intensity relative to what is required to build it is sufficient to keep it. So you can see that we can actually maintain your muscle, okay, on a very small percentage of the amount of volume required to build new muscle, okay? So for instance, to use Corey as an example again here, we got up to the point where he needed, 23 sets per week of direct quad work in order to progress his physique, okay? We ran a mini cut and we worked in the, I think it was like 7 to 10 rep range for his quads for that whole period. And we were then able to grow, moving back up to only sort of like 12, 14 sets per week. Okay, so what we found there is after the mini cut, we could grow on a much lower amount of training volume per week relative to where we'd been prior to the mini cut. And the reason we got that is because essentially you get then improved sensitivity to each individual set that you're doing. So if you're used to having to do 23 sets, you drop down to 10. You then find when you move back up after that, you're used to doing a smaller quantity of work. When you move the work back up, you don't need quite as much as you used to in order to potentiate or stimulate maximal muscle growth. So they're a really interesting way to improve your runway for future physique progression. So volume is a really big element to this. Now, with training volumes for mini cuts, we will typically run like 30 to 50% of someone's typical training volumes in their massing phases, or by the end of their massing phase prior to mini cutting, will half their volume or maybe even less depending on the muscle group. Now, I say depending on the muscle group, but it's very, very important that volumes here are a little bit more equitably distributed across muscle groups. So a mini cut is not the time to be attempting to specialize certain areas. And the reason for that is, if you want to specialize certain muscle groups, you need to be able to, which basically just means give them more stimulus, you need to be able to drop other muscle groups down to maintenance, okay? Now, maintenance is going to require more sets in a deficit than it is in a surplus, okay? So what that means is that when you are mini cutting, A, you're not going to be building any muscle, so it makes no sense to specialize, okay? And B, you would have to do more for everything if you were actively trying to hold stuff at maintenance, which means you have less additional recovery capacity to put towards the stuff that you're specializing. So all of that is a very jumbly way of saying, essentially, you're not looking to specialize and grow certain areas in a mini cut, you're looking to maintain muscle on much lower training volumes. And what we'll typically do is we will increase training volumes much more slowly across a mini cut mesocycle than we will across a normal massing or hypertrophy mesocycle. So we will typically keep things pretty stable and we'll just bump them up when the recovery feedback really indicates that it is necessary. But what we will also do is use the mini cuts as an opportunity to improve someone's ability to get more out of less with their training volume. So we will basically consolidate their training down to the bare bones, all right? So we're gonna get into that in a second, but we will basically challenge them to improve basically how far they can take each set. So if you can get someone's ability to really push themselves in an individual set, their ability to work truly close to failure and grind out those tough reps, it's a great opportunity to work on that skill in an environment where total weekly training volumes are much lower. And obviously it is easier to work harder when volumes are lower. So this is something that we really focus on during mini cuts. We'll basically cut their volumes down, and typically this is done by cutting out a lot of the fluff stuff. So we'll cut out a lot of their isolation work, we'll rely more on the big compounds, and we'll say, look, I'm gonna cap you at 4 sets per week, for quads over this mesocycle, and I wanna see how hard we can take those. We'll typically start people a little bit closer to failure in a mesocycle. We might even start them at 2 RAR, depending on the individual, okay? As opposed to 3 for most sort of massing phases. And we'll hold that a little bit more constant across it rather than sort of building up the intensity with which they train on a weekly basis. So it's going to improve someone's ability to push themselves on a set-by-set basis. And as you can see, when you then add, volume back in after the mini cut, that ability is going to give them the capacity to produce a higher stimulus. So we've got volume, we've got intensity, we're paring down the amount of work that they're doing, we're cutting out a lot of the fluff or isolation work, we're focusing on the big compounds. What we will also do during a mini cut is a great opportunity to basically give some of your favored lifts a rest, okay? So you'll get some people or a lot of people who get on really, really well with Romanian deadlift. So if this person, say, has been Romanian deadlifting for a year straight, all right, it's a great opportunity to say, right, during the mini cut, when we're not looking to maximize muscle growth, we're gonna swap this for a belt squat RDL, or we're gonna swap it for a Smith machine good morning. We're gonna swap it with another exercise that isn't one of their favorite or tier 1 exercises. And I like to use this as a bit of an exploration phase. So I'll be like, look, we've never used this variation of a hip hinge before. We've always just run with Romanian deadlifts because they've served you so well. But it's a great chance to say, right, we're gonna try this. We're not actively trying to build muscle during this mini cut. So it's a great opportunity to basically add to our list of tier 1 exercises and try new things. And if you find out that, yeah, you know what, I didn't quite click with the Smith machine good morning, I way prefer, a barbell Romanian deadlift, means that after the mini cut, you can then bring in that barbell Romanian deadlift, and you'll know, if you've ever taken a break from an exercise and you come back to it, suddenly previously you might need 3-4 sets to really feel like you've got a response in the target tissues, but you take a little bit of break from it, you come back and you have repotentiated that movement, because you will find you then get much more of a novel stimulus and you tend to get a much better fatigue to stimulus ratio. Okay, so it's a great opportunity to rest some of your tier 1 exercises and also to try out some new exercises that you haven't previously been using. Now, like I mentioned, it's really, really important to understand that the goal of a mini cut is not to actively try to build muscle, but it is a great opportunity to basically try and improve the amount of muscle that you can build after that. So one of the other ways that we like to use this or do this is we will move people slightly away from the super longer muscle length movements that we're doing. So things like Romanian deadlifts or super length and range, lateral raises, super inclined dumbbell curls. We'll move people more to mid-range tension movements. And what this means is that, they're still doing plenty to maintain tissue. They're still getting great target, they're still getting great tension on those target tissues. But it means that we can then bring in those longer muscle length movements when we move back to aiming for basically maximal muscle growth. And what we see then is we get another bursts of growth from bringing those back in, because we've repotentiated that really powerful growth stimulus. And by pulling out some of those super long muscle length or really deep squats, sissy squats, RDLs, all of the really deep long muscle length stuff, we also have an opportunity to just reduce stresses on connective tissues a little bit, because like I said, we're looking to repotentiate muscle growth in every way. And one of the most powerful ways that you can do this with a mini cut is to basically try and fix any little niggles that someone might be working with. Okay, so they might be grinding for it and you'll keep it under control, during the hypertrophy phase, but it's a great opportunity to really try and fix some of those connective tissue problems when they're in an environment where they're putting less volume through it. You're not sort of having to shoot for maximal hypertrophy. You're not putting quite so much stress through those connective tissues. So that is a prime opportunity to fix any of those little injury niggles that will then hold you back down the line if you're looking to maximize muscle growth after the fact. And one of the other things that we do to improve both, that capacity to heal connective tissue problems, but also to repotentiate future growth, is to introduce a lot of pauses in the length and range. So we will specifically do a lot of, it's called amortization pauses, which is basically pauses in the lengthened position of the muscle group. So rather than the shortened isometric position, we're looking for that sort of length and range pauses, pausing at the bottom of a squat, at the bottom of a bench press. And what this does is, number one, it controls the forces and change of direction at the bottom of the rep. So it's going to be a little bit safer from an injury management perspective and load management perspective, but it also means that after that mini cut, when you move back into a hypertrophy phase, number one, you've improved the mechanics of the lift, you're really well balanced at the bottom of your squat, but also you're in a position where you're like, right, I've got to the point where I'm starting to plateau on these pause rep back squats. Now I can take out that pause and I see another burst of growth, because I can then get more load onto the bar, improve tension on the target muscles. I'm no longer having to pause at the bottom. So those are the main levers that we're looking to basically pull with a true mini cut. So a mini cut that is designed to potentiate future growth with muscle growth, rather than simply to cash your chips too frequently and just constantly reveal what you've got. So I think the biggest mistake people make is, number one, they don't understand how to deploy a mini cut. So they don't understand that its point is, genuinely to potentiate future growth. They just think it's a short diet, okay? And duration is one of the elements that separates it from a longer cut. You've got 4 to 6 weeks rather than anything longer. But you've also got all of the stuff we've just discussed. You can see that if you integrate those things into your mini cut programming, it becomes a really, really powerful tool to then increase the amount of muscle growth you get afterwards. And this is one of the things we do that keeps our really advanced trainees continuing to progress where most people would stall, because most people will keep all of their training pretty much exactly the same and just run a short diet. And as a result, they're running a short diet, they go back to bulking, but they haven't actually, improved their sensitivity to training stimulus. They've just taken a short diet. So they pick up where they left off and they're still not getting a great return on the effort they're putting in. So smart application of mini cuts can be the difference between literally staying the same for years on end if you just don't apply them correctly or don't understand what you're trying to get out of them. But if you use them correctly, they can keep you being able to move forward in distinct chunks with your physique. And that is the difference between, being able to get results with advanced trainees and just basically just knowing how to put people into a calorie deficit.